So hello, everyone. Welcome. It's good to see you all. Happy Friday. This is SV at Home's January Housing Action Coalition. And we are so very, very excited to be covering the topic that we have today on tenant protections. You know, at SV at Home, we recognize that home starts with individuals, with people, with households, with families. And so we absolutely want to bring to light all of the work that we in this region are doing around protecting tenants in their homes, preventing displacement, because we know that so many are vulnerable, at risk of losing their housing, at being unstable in their housing, and we want to work to add stability to communities. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Emily Ramos, who's going to kick us off into this January HAC. Welcome again.
Thank you, Ms. Regina. Welcome to this month's HAC. HAC stands for Housing Action Coalition, and the HAC series is a monthly discussion-based action focus event that is hosted by Silicon Valley at Home, which we typically have on the fourth Friday of every month. Now, before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional, ancestral, unceded territory of the indigenous people of the Muwekma, Ohlone, Ramaytush, and Tamian nations, on which we are learning, working, and organizing today. We are committed to honoring and making visible the indigenous people and tribes that were intentionally displaced from their land, who remain here in Silicon Valley and are part of our community. So we are now going to go through some ground rules. We are in a meeting style by design. And as such, we want to capture the feelings of meeting and interacting in person. So in that spirit, we encourage you to keep your video on if you're able, and to create as much of a community dialogue feel as possible. And we want to ensure that conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. So please be kind and courteous to each other. We will not tolerate rude comments or personal attacks. And we encourage asking questions and listening. Both are active components of learning and engaging with each other. So please remember that today's conversation is focused on tenant protections, and keep comments and questions on topic. We do find that sometimes that chat can get lively. If you find it distracting from the content of the discussion, we encourage you to consider closing the chat temporarily. So now we're going to go on to our topic, and we are going to begin with Lauren Bigelow. She is the Partnerships for the Bay's Future Fellow, and she works with the City of Palo Alto and us, Silicon Valley at Home, to address the vulnerabilities that renters face by developing policies that provide renters with protections. Prior to joining the fellowship, Lauren worked at Palo Alto Housing and focused on empowering individuals by connecting them with housing and networks of community partners to help them thrive, and educating them about local policy and advocacy groups. Dedicated to preservation and production of affordable housing, Lauren also serves as the housing commissioner in the city of Menlo Park in her spare time. She holds a bachelor's degree in psychology and social action from Palo Alto University and a BA in theater and communications from Goucher College. Outside of work, Lauren can be found watching live music, reading, practicing yoga, and finding new foods to try. Thank you for joining us, Lauren.
Oh, it is such a pleasure to be here. I really wish that we could be in person, but I very much appreciate all of you taking the time during your lunches to stare at a screen with all of us some more. So thank you very much. And with that, I will just hop right into a presentation that I kind of threw together about the last couple of years, which covers who Palo Alto renters are, and the existing policies that impacted them, some of the proposed policies that we suggested to council to protect renters, and what is moving forward. So let me share my screen here. I feel like I have never gotten used to sharing my screen, even though we are 2 years into a pandemic here. Okay. Let's do this, shall we? Maybe it'll work. Maybe she's born with it. Maybe it's Maybelline. I was not born with this. My mother is actually on the line right now, and she can tell you that it's true. Here we go. There it is. Okay, so can you guys see that full screen, or is it still in presenter view? All good. Great. So again, we are covering who Palo Alto renters are and what laws and protections exist for them in Palo Alto. And the first thing that always surprises people is, according to ACS data or American Community Survey data, 45% of Palo Altans are renting. And I think when people think of Palo Alto, they generally think of single family homes and people who have bought those single family homes, but really there are a lot of folks there who are renting their home. And here you can see that we just talked about those single family homes. A big portion of the rental housing stock is single family detached, as well as a few triplexes and fourplexes, and then some smaller sized properties between 5 to 20 units, and medium sized properties between 20 to 50 units. And then 22% of the housing stock is large apartment complexes of 50 or more units. So that covers where people live. Who people are is clearly comes down to how much money they make. That's not true. But this slide shows that 27% of Palo Alto renters are actually making less than $50,000 as an entire household. And that really surprises people. And the 39% that make more than $150,000, I think, is probably not a surprise to folks. But if you combine those two lower bars there, you're looking at 46%, almost half of the rental, one half of renters are making less than $100,000 in Palo Alto. And what does that look like for how many folks are cost burdened? Basically, again, according to American Community Survey data, we took a look at the different income levels, how many units they were, and how many of those units within each income level were cost burdened. And the delineation here is about the orange is where more than 50% of the units are cost burdened, and the green are where less than 50% are cost burdened. So you can see here that under $75,000 for an entire household, you're looking at between 70 to 85% of those households are income burdened. So folks are hurting. And if you're making more than $75,000, a lot less of those folks are cost burdened, which those two numbers smushed together gives you a grand total of about 38%. But within these orange numbers, you can see it comes out to 80% of households under $75,000 are cost burdened. So those are where the renters are living, and also how much they're paying out of their income for their housing. let's talk a little bit about what the existing rental protection policies are at the local level. Palo Alto has a mediation program. Landlords have to offer at least a 1-year lease. And there's also a little bit of tenant relocation assistance that applies to rental households that are part of properties with 50 plus units. So again, that's 22% of the rental households. There's also AB 1482, which the Tenant Protection Act of 2019, it really basically talks about making sure that the rental housing stock, they don't have huge price increases with their rent, and that people, if they get evicted, are only evicted for certain reasons. So that's kind of what AB 1482 talks about. Because Palo Alto doesn't have just cause or rent control, a lot of AB 1482 comes into play there. So I decided it was a great idea to throw a whole bunch of renter protections against the wall and kind of see what sticks. And with that, I researched about 9 different policies, and they are a rental survey program, which acts as a rent registry, tenant relocation assistance, eviction reduction, anti-rent gouging, security deposit limit, fair chance ordinance, right to counsel, COPA-TOPA, or tenant or community opportunity to purchase act, and a proactive rental inspection. Oh, that was deep breath. And really the thing to know about those is that 2 of the policies were based on existing local policies. So the rental survey program, a rent registry already existed in Palo Alto, but wasn't fully implemented. So we said, hey guys, maybe you should do a little more with that. And also tenant relocation, as I said, only applied to 22% of the housing stock. So we said, let's talk about expanding that more. There are also 2 policies based on expanding state policies, which was AB 1482 that I already talked about, and those just cause and anti-rent gouging policies. We wanted to make sure that we covered as many of them as possible. So we proposed a little few patches to the legal carve-outs that were there. Then we also talked about 2 barriers to entry, which I think everybody here knows that housing costs a lot. And to move into a place, you have to pay a security deposit. According to California's Civil Code, you can get charged 2 times the rent for a unfurnished unit, as well as paying first and last. So you're looking at 4 times thousands of dollars. And that really hampers people's ability to move into places. There's also a fair chance housing ordinance that we discussed, which basically was about making sure that people who had been released from incarceration and already paid their due were able to find housing. So there wasn't any issue with folks circling back and recidivism rates. Then there was the right to counsel. A crazy number of tenants don't have any legal representation, and it sways a ton of court cases. Who would have thought, right? And last but not least, we wanted to make sure that we addressed people and the state of their housing, making sure that those places were safe and making sure that people were able to purchase those or have the opportunity to purchase those before their property owners put those onto the market. So November 29th, we brought all of those forward, and here's what they said. They said, we want 3 ordinances. We have 3 priorities. There's a whole bunch of stuff going back to policy and services. And up next, we have a vote on Monday for tenant relocation assistance. And again, you can see here that in the green is covered by the current ordinance, and the blue here covers medium-sized units, effectively doubling the number of renters that are covered with tenant relocation assistance, which is really just about if somebody gets evicted through no fault of their own, then it's going to be hard to pay all of that money for a new security deposit, moving costs like actually hiring movers, and even the time spent looking for new housing. Those all add up to be pretty considerable costs. So that's that. 10 minutes. Oh gosh, I said a lot. Sorry, guys. But I'll turn it over back to Em.
So we have a lot of great questions in the chat. But before we go to those, I'm going to pass it off to Angie, who's also presenting today. And she's going to show us on the other side of, if you saw Lauren handling from the city side, we're going to see Angie that's going to be handling how we can organize and activate. So Angie is currently a senior project administrator with BitFocus, currently working with Santa Clara County stakeholders to end homelessness and build more collaborative, effective, and efficient systems of care. Angie was a community organizer for 15 plus years, working on local, state, and national and the national level around healthcare reform, immigration reform, federal appropriations for anti-poverty programs. And much of her career has been centered on building power in marginalized communities. In 2015, Angie helped pass the first rent control law in Silicon Valley in decades and shifted her focus on housing affordability and tenant rights. She was the interim organizing director at the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo County and the executive director of Palo Alto Forward. In 2020, Angie co-founded the Palo Alto Renters Association along with her neighbors. She continues to sit on the Renters Association and steering committee, and she's going to go over the advocacy side and how almost like an inside-outside strategy to getting these protections. And just so you know, I do see the questions in the chat, and we will get to those.
Thank you, Emily. And also thank you to everybody who came on. And before this started, I was like, I don't know who's going to come on and listen to us at the noon hour on their Friday. So it's really exciting to see all the people who joined. It's also really exciting to see lots of familiar faces and names, some from Palo Alto. And I also see a lot from Mountain View, including Maria Marroquin, who is a celebrity. If you don't know her in Mountain View, you should. So this is just a pitch to also support the Day Worker Center. All right, let me pull up my presentation. Ooh, hold on, I'm having the same problem Lauren is, where it's trying to show everything else in my calendar.
It's Friday, yo.
Yeah.
I mean,
my computer knows it. Okay, there we go. Now, there we go. Okay, everybody. All right, so as Emily said, I am one of the steering committee members for the Palo Alto Renters Association. The first thing I want to say is that I'm just one of the steering committee members. There are 8 volunteer steering committee members and 2 part-time staff. And I say that to highlight that no one person in our organization is a mountain. We all really work together as a team. And I think that's one of the most important parts of our work. So the story of us starting, Emily mentioned that we started in 2020. 8 of us came together really with a vision to make Palo Alto listen to renters. We're consistently applying for things like the Planning Commission and other appointed bodies, but our voices were left out. A homeowner benefiting from 30 years of Prop 13 can't actually represent the experience of a low-income renter, or really virtually any income renter in a city like Palo Alto. And as Lauren highlighted, we knew that almost half of the city's population was renters, but we weren't being included in decision-making around housing, land use, or even tenant protections, the thing that impacts us the most. So since they weren't giving us a seat at the table, we decided we were just gonna make one. And they weren't giving us a seat at the table really until Lauren came into this fellowship. And I highlight this because in advocacy, we sometimes underestimate what a friendly and collegial relationship can do for things like policy. Part of Lauren's fellowship has been to find a new, better, and deeper way to engage the renter community and to really look at what our problems are. So I want to highlight that my advice to organizers is really to be nice to city staff. They're not allowed to play favorites. They're doing their best and they're juggling a lot of priorities, but you cannot underestimate just being nice to city staff. So how did we start a tenant group? I like to think that good tenant organizing groups bring a few things together. A lot of folks talk about, the policy side of tenant organizing, and that's really important, but it's not the whole. You need good policy, but you really need good infrastructure. You need base building. Base building is kind of like the nuts and bolts of organizing. And you need to be able to meet people's basic needs. So what's the Palo Alto Renters Association really working on? In the beginning, we set a list of policy priorities. The way we did that is really, we emailed our entire email list, which we built from our own personal contacts, to hear what people in the community were experiencing and wanted to see happen. And then we narrowed that list by having our steering committee members look at what they thought they could realistically work on, and where we thought we could really impact things. And we've used those principles kind of as a guiding set in all of our work. More than our mission, we think about it as kind of like, what are the things that are advancing our mission? And so when people ask us to do things like comment on topics, we ask ourselves, by looking at those guiding principles, is this something that members really want? The principles have kind of saved us from falling into the bureaucracy trap that often burns out volunteer-based groups like this. But policy objectives are really only as important as the members that can move them forward. Because of that, we spent a lot of the first year really creating the internal infrastructures that we thought would make this a more sustainable organization. Part of why I highlight this is because one of the most important things that I learned from the Mountain View Tenants Coalition is that without very clear infrastructure, your organization, institution, all the base building that you do, it can collapse really, really quickly and really easily. Infrastructure, and for us, thinking about structure, we really thought that having it dispersed, allowing for leadership in various ways and types and decentralized, spread out, without kind of lacking that strict hierarchy that some other kinds of groups will have, it worked really well for our tenant organizing piece. I know in tenant organizing, sometimes you hear a lot of negative feedback around structure. Structure doesn't have to be bad. It really just needs to be a vessel that you can work from. And I can't stress enough how important that is at the beginning, not in the middle, because you're going to be in crisis over and over again in tenant groups. So how do we think Palo Alto Renters Association can move toward our vision for a more equitable community for renters? First, the thing that I always lean on is movement building. The future of community organizing is not going to be just petitions and signatures, although I think we can all probably agree that ballot measures and door knocking are not going to go away. But the future of organizing, I think, is really going to bring together services and programs that meet people's basic needs and provide leadership opportunity to other people. And it's not kind of a quid pro quo system, but it's more of a way to ensure that our policies and those decisions impacting the most vulnerable people really include them as decision makers as well. I'm also a social worker. And so this concept took some unlearning, but we can't continue to be a system of helpers. We really have to be a system aimed at collaboration toward mutual benefit. This is what I like to think of as my bragging slide about Palo Alto Renters Association. One of the things that we work really hard on is we don't share people's hardship stories just to elicit an emotional reaction from elected officials. We try to curate experiences that put power back into the hands of tenants. And the last thing I want to really acknowledge is that, you know, we're a tiny local group and we don't try to do everything. SV at Home has been really helpful in kind of the policy piece of it. So how do you create relationships with regional policy organizations that can help you to think about how you react to proposals going through city council, going through commissions, and how can you build relationships that will also let you know what is a regional, what's a countywide measure you should be commenting on as an organization. We supported some statewide legislation, but we really look toward Tenants Together and Peninsula for Everyone to help us say, like, hey, what are the things that are coming down the pike? If you try to do everything as a small group, you will burn out your organizers, you will burn out your volunteers very quickly. There are not unlimited resources in the world, and that's just a reality. Okay, so this is my last slide. I am going to mention one more thing. Assuming that Palo Alto even remotely meets some of our regional housing goals, it's going to become a permanent renter majority. People can't buy $4 million homes. And that shift to a permanent renter majority is going to be reflected in our electorate. Even if that takes some time before City Council starts to hear our demands, that time is just more opportunity for us to be doing base building and really making a stronger, wider, and more effective base than their dwindling base. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you very much.
And I'm actually going to hop in really quick and say two things that Angie didn't mention, which is one, the regional housing needs that were talked about and whether Palo Alto could meet them or not. Renter protections have actually been called out as a really strong anti-displacement tool that help folks with affirmatively furthering fair housing, which has been called out as a really big goal for HCD and RENA, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. So that's one thing. And two things. The second thing, there we go, is that no matter how disconnected your community feels, there's always a place to start. When Angie and I started talking, there hadn't been a renter organizing body in 50 years. So you can start from wherever you are and create something wonderful from hard places.
Going off from that, say you're a renter in Morgan Hill, Gilroy, or Milpitas. Where do you start?
You always start with your people.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's, it's harder. Like, I'll be honest, it's harder to organize in the age of COVID, where connecting with your neighbors is not as simple as going and knocking on the door, because you don't know what everyone's level of direct contact comfort is. And that's something to be really cognizant of. But, this is going to sound really silly, but one of the ways that I found a lot of other renters who were in the same situation, who were like, acknowledging how frustrating the system was going on Nextdoor. I literally went on Nextdoor and I just searched rent, and it pulls up, like you can term search on it, and then you can spend like 3 hours just like, I sent direct messages to like everybody who posted like, hey, my landlord is doing this. Is that crazy or not crazy? Is this legal or not legal? And you just start to build relationships with people that way and start to come together and find a way. You don't have to start an entire organization. You can start a group that just casually meets once a month and talks about what's coming up on city council's agenda that might be important to you and the other people you brought together. So
one of the things that we actually found with the Renters Association is a lot of people feel disconnected and disempowered. So even providing like a safe space where, you form a knitting circle or a group of foodies and occasionally bring up what's going on in their home lives, it's fine. And it's a place to start, you can move from there. Also, it's really important that you get folks talking with their city and that the city understands that the community already knows what it needs. You just have to get them talking to each other so that your elected officials are able to understand the community's needs and work together with the cities or jurisdictions and present policy solutions that are representative of the communities they're in.
Yeah. And I would also add, like, because a lot of these, like, I don't know, I think you mentioned Milpitas, like, not all these cities are going to have a Lauren. And unfortunately, Palo Alto is not going to have a Lauren soon because her fellowship is ending. But, I think doing things as simple as, like, let's say you find those other 3 people, 5 people, 8 people who also care about this. You don't have to find what's exactly the thread you want to say, but you could bring those 5 people together and invite your mayor just to have a Zoom chat with them. It doesn't have to be adversarial. It doesn't have to have a specific agenda. You can just, you can ask your elected officials to come and meet with your small group to talk about what's going on with renters.
That's great. Going on from how we start from scratch, how would people know what protections that they do have?
A lot of reading, or find organizations that are already existing. So there are a ton of organizations out there that are committed to organizing and probably have already thought of the questions that you have. So don't always feel like you're starting from scratch. Connect to the places that already exist. And so you've got your SV at homes, you've got, I don't know, your Yimbys, your Peninsula for Everyone, all sorts of, or nonprofit housing association of Northern California. There are all sorts of people that are trying to answer these questions. And also, if you feel like you're starting out and want help connecting to these people, don't hesitate to contact any of these people here. Like, I'm willing to put it out there that most of them would willingly answer your email and help you find the places to connect. And if they're not, I will. So email me.
Yeah. So I would say, so it's usually like, there are 2 separate things there, right? It's like, either I'm in crisis and I need to know what my rights are. And in that case, if you don't have a local tenant group, like, I would just call Tenants Together's hotline. And then the second thing is, like, we're not in crisis. We want to figure out what our tenant protection policies are in our city. And unfortunately, there's not a great landing page that's like, these are all the tenant protections you have in your city. And every jurisdiction shares what their protections are in different ways and in different levels. So, like, it's really hard, right? But that's like one of the great things that a local tenants group could do is say city by city, here are the state policies that apply here. Here are the county policies that apply here. Here are the city policies that apply here. Here are the things that we don't have here, but we know we need. And if I'm ever really stuck, I'm gonna tell you guys a secret. I just DM Shanti on Twitter from Tenants Together, and I think she knows all things. I don't know if anyone
I love
disagrees.
that Angie and I are just like doling out answers like, here, guys, here's some more work to do. You wanted that, right?
So I love how we were like DMing, sliding into people's DMs is a great organizational tool. When you mentioned state protections, we did have a question of what's going on with the state pandemic rental assistance program. We don't have full answers from the state. However, what we do recommend, especially when families are in limbo, is that they still apply for the rent relief assistance if you need it. But as we look at our local groups trying to advocate to our local city councils, how do you transform that to get some pressure onto the state for what we need?
Okay. I mean, like I said in my presentation, we don't try to do all things. So we go back to groups like SV at Home or Peninsula for Everyone or Tenants Together, and we let them tell us what is helpful. And we think about how that fits into the work that we're doing. You know, I think of all the things that a local organization could do. Like the list is endless, right? So you have to have some of them as a priority function that your organization leads. And you have to have others like the way we do statewide regional work, which is it is not a primary priority. It's a secondary priority where we follow other people's leads.
Yeah, my immediate answer is pretty similar, which is like, well, how much time do you have? Are you trying to recreate the wheel and connections that other people are working on? And can you lend some of your time and energy to them so that you're building in numbers rather than a whole bunch of individual kind of pushes, which is, you know, it's one way to organize, certainly by making a lot of noise, but you can also make concentrated efforts and pushes by joining together.
Yeah, and I think that's like, when I said we do movement building at Para, like that's one of the things we think a lot about is like, there's mob organizing where you get like a bunch of mad people and they like show up and they demand a thing, right? That's cool. That can be really fun. It also doesn't it doesn't shift power in the long term. And so we might show up and have like a crazy protest, but part of that also has to be incorporating something that shifts power in the long term and doesn't function around reactionary.
Yeah, I would agree with that and say so much of this work is, one, should be based in people, but two, is really about the longevity, right? The relationship that you're building over time. So just because a council member or a supervisor or a senator voted one way on one thing doesn't mean you have to hate them forever. Like that's a moment. And they can still work with you in the future if they don't agree on everything, because you can find those places of connection together over time.
That's wonderful. And I would also like to add that when you have one group, say we have Para now in Palo Alto, we have the Tenants Coalition in Mountain View. If we have organizations or community groups popping up in Milpitas, in Montessorino, in Los Altos, that can build on each other. We can all work together to push our state to do something, along with pushing what our local communities can do. So that is how, like with the local and state This is addressing one of the other questions, how local and state consolidation and overwhelm community-based organizations issues are being handled, is that we have to work together. And you do what you can really well, and then reach out for help with other organizations to make it all come together. So we will jump to we have a question about COPA, and that was one of the policies that was looked into, although it wasn't recommended for Palo Alto. It is currently being explored in a few other places. So we had a question with SB 9, is COPA a more meaningful policy to apply to single family homes? Would nonprofits or CBOs use this opportunity to preserve existing tenancies and create additional opportunities with lot splits and duplex construction?
Mayor Ramirez with the easy questions.
Oh, that came from Lucas?
Yes.
Lucas, why are you doing this to us? I hadn't even thought about that, but like, that's kind of a cool idea. Like because one of the challenges I see with SB 9 is that there is the owner move in requirement. So the community would have to purchase that single family lot and then convert it. I mean, I think it could work. I think the question is like, and this is, I think this is going to constantly be a question around COPA. And it's one of the reasons that the city of Palo Alto didn't move toward it. Like lots of us support it. One of the challenges for a city like Palo Alto is like, is your community competitive in applying for funding to make those projects a reality? Because so much of our kind of affordable housing construction really just comes back to the financing mechanisms.
Yep.
Not just like, does the money exist, but is your community competitive in the application process for them?
That was going to be what I was going to say as well. I didn't spend as much time researching opportunities to purchase act because there was some significant cost involved in setting it up and getting it going. And we wanted to do things that were proactive in the community on a slightly larger than single family home scale. And so that's why I don't have a good answer for you, but I like Angie's answer.
Oh, the other thing I would also look at is like, what's your average lot size? If this is a policy you're going to apply to, like, for example, like with East Palo Alto has a fairly large average lot size. And so this is me. I don't know I don't think City of Palo Alto can comment on it, but like, East Palo Alto is a great candidate for these policies because of their average lot size and because of where they would line up in the funding mechanisms.
And it is one of the reasons that they're exploring opportunity to purchase act, as well as, gosh, I think San Jose is, Berkeley, places that have partnership for the Bay's Future Fellows other than Palo Alto. Yeah, so it's a hot topic right now, which Allison, I see that it is next month. So we're just setting you guys up for success. Agreed. I think it's a really interesting new idea that needs to be fleshed out a lot.
Great. We do have, going back to power of the tenants, we have a question in the chat who would love to hear more about how you help folks get power back as they share their stories.
Yeah. So we haven't been like, we're not like, oh, we do it perfectly, right? So there's going to be like all kinds of ideas that I don't have or haven't had yet. So you should put them in the chat. If you're like, this was something I did that was awesome, or this is something I wish organizations did, put it in the chat. One of the things that I think we do well is we try to develop our leadership ladder through people that we work with on a regular basis. So You know, if there are folks who are coming to us and have come to us for support and help, like, how do you build a leadership ladder that incorporates people who have been engaged in your process? Not just people who, like you said, hey, call city council, but the people who have called you to say, like, I can't make my rent this month. How do I do that? So I think that's one part of it. And then the other part of it is that in November, we implemented kind of based on the lived experience board recommendations that came from the federal government around homelessness agencies. We now do a meeting stipend for all of our steering committee members. It is optional. Nobody has to take it, but we provide that for anyone who is on our steering committee.
Word, I would, yeah, agree completely. So increasing access to opportunities to connect by doing things like paying stipends, if you can, is one way to really make it worth a person's while to be there. And a lot of this work is with humans who are going through really tough times. And there's a lot of stigma and shame that are related to those things. So just also having a safe space where you know that you're not alone and you're not going to get judged for showing up however you're showing up. And also, we try not to weaponize people's trauma. So the idea that people share deeply personal ideas with us, we don't immediately say, well, what's the best way that we can manipulate people using these things? You've got to be thoughtful and intentional about it so that people feel like your partner in doing this work and not like they are tools to get points across. You're in it together.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that we have done, and I'm thinking about, like, somebody, we got an email from last night that was just like, it was like, this is why we have this organization. And when, so there's a building here where half of the tenants, they were not legally evicted. They were served notices to vacate. I can't remember the terminology, but it was like an optional, you can just leave your apartment. You can move if you want, because we're going to renovate. And it was, and if you don't, then we'll evict you. So I'm not sure how optional it is. It was completely legal, but it's totally unethical. And they did it only to the units with lower income tenants in the building. And we didn't go into the building and talk to tenants and say, like, hey, immediately, do you want to talk to city council? We went in and we said, like, first of all, what do you need? Now that we've, like, tried to help you get what you need, how do you think we, you and me together, could help make sure this doesn't happen again? And so the email I got last night was like, it was to let this tenant know that they had communicated with city council about this building eviction process. And on Monday at Palo Alto City Council, they're going to be reviewing a policy to expand tenant relocation assistance to buildings of 10 or more units. And it's directly because of this tenant communicating with city council. And so it's like those moments where you can be like, you actually have the power, like, you did this. We, like me, or like this other steering committee member, like, we didn't do this. You and I and us together, like, we did this together. And it's because of you. So I think handing it back to people, not holding it yourself.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we forget sometimes is that none of us are mind readers, right? And so that includes elected officials. What you need, they don't necessarily know that you need it, and they're not going to know unless you tell them. So you have a lot of power in this situation.
That's great. I could listen to you both all day, and I think
We would talk all day, so just shut us up when it says so.
so we are actually coming up on time. And so I wanted to leave people with a call to action. So a lot of the tenant protections and the organizing questions, and there is even a question of what protections we have, especially currently due to COVID. And so a call to action that we have thought to have with this program was for people to get involved with the housing element. And I know most people, when they talk about the housing elements, you hear about the RHNA numbers, which is how much you're supposed to build, which is a very important aspect of our housing element. But most people don't know that you can also advocate for policies of tenant protections into the housing element, which Palo Alto is looking at right now, along with Lauren's work. So all the stuff that Palo Alto is doing in pushing their tenant protections, that's going to go into their housing element so that they can, what we call, affirmatively further fair housing. Now, if you want to find out more on how to do that, we recommend that you sign up for SV at Home's housing element mailing list, and we're going to get you the resources and information you need to push these policies forward, along with many other policies that can help solve our housing crisis. The next thing is I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to ask people to join us, become a member. If I could share my screen actually properly. It's fine, you guys can all see that. So with that, and not that screen, with that, we have finished up with our programming.
But just as a reminder from somebody outside the organization, there's also a holiday party tonight if you guys want to come to that online.
With all the cool kids. Yes, and I'm putting the clickable link into the chat right now. And we mentioned COPA very briefly in this meeting, but we also have our next HAC is going to be about COPA. And we're going to have an exciting program with you that goes over San Jose's program of going over COPA. And we recommend that you check that out, because the more policies we have there to protect renters, the more we can build our way out of this housing crisis. So thank you all for your time. And I'm putting the February HAC registration link in the chat right now. You all also get all these wonderful resources and the resources that were mentioned today in a follow-up email along with the recording. So thank